I'm
Oh, that's nice.
Jordan Zachar, and you get the alert, right? The reporter, the editor, the guy, the haphazard voice behind Progress Report newsletter. I'm here with Michael Lang, who is a indispensable, I would say. I've relied on his coverage a lot for the mayoral election during this crazy few months, especially. He writes the narrative wars and highly. I'll say this: when I was working on one of the campaigns, which I've written about, and worked with just Ramos, they were very. Every time I put out a big candidate analysis, there was a lot of pause to read it. So people love your work, and we're a few days away. So thank you for taking some time out from walking across the city and canvassing everywhere and being here.
Thank you for having me. Also, shout out to you. You pronounced my last name correctly. Lang, you
Yeah.
nailed it. Not everyone does, though.
Well,
It's stealthily tricky, I would say.
my last name is Zachar, and it looks exactly like it's spelled, but everyone gets it wrong. So I'm
Yeah.
sensitive to that idea. It's people like to complicate it.
But thank you for having me on. I mean, we have a very large audience, so really the pleasure is all mine, frankly.
Well, everyone. I mean, it's amazing that how much this election has become a national, I guess, flashpoint for litmus test or some sort of proxy battle. I guess you could say, because there are so many things actually just happening in New York. There's the local issues, there's the national ideological issues, and so much goes into it that people all across the country care about it. I mean, I guess as New Yorkers, we can say that, of course. They care about us.
Right.
Most important, but it is amazing, especially compared to, let's say, 2021. And
Yeah.
so huge stakes in this election. I think because of the 2021 election was the real kind of a disaster class. But um, let's talk about. So we're 2 days from election day.
2 days away.
There's
Can't
been
wait. I
early
mean,
voting for
this
a
is
week.
the Super Bowl. Yeah. Yeah. We're about to get our last early voting numbers any second. People are still voting. There have been some big lines in downtown Brooklyn and Bedford-Stuyvesant, Williamsburg, things of the sort. So I think they're just kind of wrapping up there, and we'll get those numbers in an hour or in the next hour or so.
Obviously, I follow your work and follow what you said about who's turning out and who's not. And there's always questions about whether they're just showing up early. There's going to be more people, But what is the state of play right now? Let's put today aside. We don't know who got what, but how does it look early voting?
I think that it is, I feel very confident saying that Zohran Mamdani will have won the early vote, which I think probably might exceed 375,000, and that his lead is somewhere in the five figures, meaning somewhere in tens of thousands. He might have could be 10,000 vote lead, could be a 50,000 vote lead, could be an 80,000 vote lead. We'll see. But I think the early voting electorate, younger, more college educated, towards the urban core, people that are within a walking distance of their polling site, not relying on cars or public transportation to get there. I think that very much skews towards him. So we're setting ourselves up for the race. I think Zoran, from an interest standpoint, carried the race for months. I think without him, it was really sleepy besides him. But I think after all of this, we're heading for a very climactic and dramatic finish where the underdog candidate goes into election day with some unknown but non-insignificant lead. And it's basically 16 hours in record-breaking temperatures, kind of a battle to hold that lead, or at least if the lead is relinquished, to not relinquish it too badly.
Yeah,
So I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I was thinking about going early this weekend, but my early polling place is like 10 blocks uphill from
Mm.
me. And across the street is my normal polling place. So I'll be one of those people going on election day, but it will be hot as hell. It's going to be like 110 degrees, it feel like. And, we talk a lot about like how does weather impact, you can't really know for sure. How does weather or things happening impact, right? Like turnout, but it's hot, right? Like Cuomo's worried about it. His people are worried about the temperature.
They should be worried about it. I think it would make sense for them too. But there will, regardless of how bad the temperature is, there will be a Cuomo surge on election day. If you live far out into the outer boroughs, absent living in a Parkchester or a Rochdale or a co-op city, most of the early voting sites are not near the big residential centers. So there will be a certain Cuomo surge on election day. I do think that, New York, the street landscape is not the most equitable thing in the world, right? I live very close to the Upper West Side. The Upper West Side, on a 100-degree day on a tree-lined street, the surface temperature could be no more than 87, 88 degrees. That same day in East Harlem, the South Bronx, East Flatbush, on a street without trees, the surface temperature could be over 120 degrees. And I think that is a very real thing that will have significant negative consequences for Andrew Cuomo in terms of turning out the voters, the older voters that he is very reliant upon.
Yeah, we talk about coalitions, right? So, I mean, New York City is a city, 5 boroughs, obviously, but we got coalitions of people that are, Zoran's had that, not a strange, but a kind of a new coalition, bringing people together who haven't really voted too much or people who are, different, disparate communities. So let's talk about that a little bit. We got, the fact that Cuomo's at this point, I think probably wouldn't have happened had it not been for a Donald Trump comeback, right? Politics has kind of been turned on its ear, but who are the people, let's look at the top three, right? Let's look at Cuomo, let's look at Zohran Mamdani and Lander, who obviously, the two of them allied, but different coalitions. So who are the people that you would say are like the dominant factors in each coalition?
Yeah, so I guess to do some like meta political analysis here, Zohran Mamdani's coalition is very much what you could maybe deem as the coalition of the quote unquote ascendant, very similar to Obama in New York. The youngest demographics, the demographics that are also growing the most in New York City, young, college educated, predominantly white, but not necessarily so, renters, they are growing in a large number. They are firmly with him. And also his working class inroads to Asian and Latino communities. In the Data for Progress poll, he led Asian voters by over 20 points. In the recent Marist poll, he led the Hispanic electorate by 5 points. Those are not coincidences. That is because those demographics are the youngest in New York City. And there's also not as much a generational gap in voter participation because oftentimes that second younger generation has citizenship and is engaged and is, a little more integrated into local life, especially politically. Um, all of those demographics are growing. You also saw that Hispanic and Asian New Yorkers move towards Donald Trump more so than any other demographic group last November. That, in a way, also kind of helps Iran because you're having maybe more conservative elements of that Democratic primary electorate weed themselves out, and filter out, and to the point where then it gives the younger voters already growing kind of more juice in that electorate. So his strongest coalition is also the coalition that is rapidly growing. Now, granted, we are in a very unique political moment that lends itself to the insurgency that he has put forth. But it's very interesting to contrast that with Cuomo's coalition, where without fail, Andrew Cuomo on election day will perform best in the oldest neighborhoods, be they the ultra rich corridor on the Upper East Side, from Park Avenue to Fifth Avenue, right? Madison Avenue's in between, to Eastern Queens retiree neighborhoods, predominantly white ethnic, but not necessarily, to the southern shore of Staten Island, to southern Brooklyn as well. And then also the black electorate is, while younger black voters are actually moving towards Zohran Mamdani, the electorate itself remains the oldest of the four kind of major racial groups. And that is where Cuomo is banking his greatest support. And he needs to some degree, replicate or come close to replicating the performance that Eric Adams put forth 4 years ago. But I have serious questions as to whether he can do that, both in terms of a percentage and also in terms of a raw number. I don't expect his support to
Yeah.
collapse or anything like that, but I'm not sure if he'll get the numbers that he needs.
Eric Adams is an Attleboro guy. I mean, I guess you could say Cuomo grew up in Queens, been there
No, but
forever. But Eric
it is
Adams
different.
was
Yeah.
there. He's from there. Like that was his neighborhood, right? And
Yes.
Cuomo, he's close with a lot of church leaders, right? You don't want to underestimate that. But he doesn't have the same you don't have the same reason to turn out for Andrew Cuomo. I feel like, and
Right.
I don't want to read people's minds, but like it's less of a hometown guy.
There were voters who would have crawled over broken glass for Eric Adams last time. Eric Adams was he is a Bed-Stuy, regardless of whether he was living in New Jersey or not. He is a Bed-Stuy homeowner. When he told those young people moving into the neighborhood to go back to Iowa, he said that from his chest, and people knew he meant it. Andrew Cuomo, Mr. Westchester, Mr. Albany, Mr. now Sutton Place, the black community will be with him, but I don't know. I don't know if the enthusiasm, the motivation, I don't know if it's quite the same. We'll
Yeah,
see, but I genuinely believe that, and I think it could be a sticking point for him.
yeah. I think so. Right, there was coming into this election odds that he had. And I don't know if he would have won had he ever been not been indicted or whatnot. He's just not popular. He's just kind of a weird dude. It didn't really work out with him. So he comes, so he was running for election at the time, but it looked like a wide open race, right? Like it seemed like, Brad Lander was like the de Blasio 2.0 with, I think a lot of people looking back on de Blasio being like, hey, that wasn't so bad. But, he was kind of 2.0. You had, I worked for Des Ramos' campaign. She didn't put together the coalition or take the swings I thought she should. But, and I was just, I wasn't paid. I was doing, advising her. But there was a lot, it was wide open. Is Cuomo, did he think this was going to be easy? Is that why I think he ran?
He definitely thought it would be easy. Eric Adams kind of getting pushed aside with his legal trouble. It was very reminiscent of how Cuomo pushed aside David Patterson when he eventually, he got the sitting governor to not run for reelection, basically cleared the way for Cuomo to ascend from attorney general. It was very similar with the legal trouble that Adams had. And Cuomo certainly looked at the field and he said, this is junior varsity and I am a varsity level player. The star of varsity. You're telling me I have to beat this JV crew. And I think, no offense to everybody, I think that analysis was not too off.
Yeah.
Except it turned out that the Zohran Mamdani is the freshman that you put on junior varsity he's like, you can tell he's talented, he's got long arms, he's athletic, but you don't know if he can put it all together. And then 5 games into the year, that guy's your best player, right? Like to use a basketball reference, that's what he ran into. And now he's he's kind of in the fight for his life. I mean, it is the fight of his life. I know that if Zohran loses, he will have a bright future ahead of him doing many things. Andrew Cuomo, this is it. This is his chance, and a general election would be harder,
Oh, for sure.
with a relatively more crowded Mamdani opposition than just winning the primary. So he's in a dogfight now, and who knows? I ended an article by talking about how for months this is what they wanted. They wanted the one-on-one against Iran. Be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, it's the interesting thing is Cuomo. I mean, look, I'm not a fan. Going back to when he was governor, right? The IDC and all those things like that. I've written about that for a long time. But I don't know, and maybe you have a better idea of this. So that's what I'm asking you. Like, what was the case for him running? Was it for him? Was it rehabilitation? Was it like did he ever want to be mayor?
Personally, it's entire rehabilitation. I mean, what is his life beyond being in power?
Right.
And what is the life of, frankly, the people who orbit him? They wanted to basically give the middle finger to everybody who really kicked them aside when they left. It was immensely personal for them. And I think they ran a relatively dreadful campaign. They could still win, but I think, and they were so scared about kind of putting him out there. And now they're putting him out there a little more. And like, it's not like going terribly. He's not Joe Biden,
Right.
but it's just like people's reaction to him is very polarized and they significantly underestimated their opposition. But
Yeah.
the case for Cuomo, it was entirely a personally motivated decision. He hasn't lived in New York City in 32 years. It wasn't about saving the city.
No, I remember when I was doing work on the Ramos campaign. That was something I was trying to point out. We were going to do a road trip up to Westchester and then Hamptons and see other places to live because I think he stopped by the city for a minute after he left the Clinton administration. Right, it was like 9/11, then he left again. Like it's been forever since he lived here, and he only really seems to go to like churches, synagogues, and black churches. Like he's like you said, he's trying to run up the score there, but like I haven't really seen him elsewhere, and I pay attention.
No, I mean, that he goes to friendly audiences. That's been, that's by design. The labor audiences as well. Like, yeah, when he ran against Carl McCall in 2002, he lived in New York City, and then he got divorced soon after. That was kind of that was the previous Cuomo rock bottom, was kind of those years. And then he got a lifeline, running for attorney general, having that work out for him, things like that. And then this was Eric Adams being indicted and falling apart. This was his like next chance.
Yeah.
And who knows if he will squander it, but there's a lot of drama. And I know we're going to get some new polls tomorrow. I'll put on my prediction in the morning. This race will be a lot closer than that 10-point Marist poll gap.
Yeah.
I feel very confident saying that.
It's interesting to me. You mentioned there's so personal for a lot of people. For Sir Melissa Rosa, his folks, right? He is he's vindictive, right? He's famously, and so a lot of people have then jumped back to him, right? Like they would call for him to resign. I mean, Ramos is a famous one, and she looked like she was a hostage video. But a lot of people have said, you know what? The New York Times pointed this out. Other people pointed this out, but it's amazing how much Democrats have jumped back to him. And I wonder, is it a mixture of fear of like having a Democratic Socialist mayor? Is it a mixture of fear of Andrew Cuomo? Is it what do you think the reasons are for that?
I think it's mostly fear of just being on the wrong side of any type of Cuomo vindictiveness. I mean, certainly, like, there are people who personally just dislike Zohran Mamdani. Jessica Ramos is one of them. So it was very ironic. Cuomo's like fun. The most he ever smiled of the whole race was that day where she endorsed him
That's
because he
painful.
had completely humiliated someone who used to attack him. And
Yeah,
that's kind of what they like to do. And people they don't want to be on the other end of that. And I think also, like, in 2021, when people called on him to resign, people move with the win. It wasn't, I actually was not terribly surprised by all the people who've endorsed him just because I don't really have a high opinion. I write about this for a living. I don't have a high opinion of like 90% of or 80% of the politicians in
yeah.
the city and probably in general. Is that, like, when it comes down to it, the knee is bent. People look out for themselves and no one wanted to be caught holding the bag of a Cuomo landslide.
And it's interesting because obviously you got so many Democrats in New York, and like you said, it's shifted a bunch. The demographics and the who people support in the city, terms move red to some degree, but it's shifted a bunch. But at the same time, you got so many people who hate Donald Trump. But yeah, and I wrote about this. I don't know how different this is from Republicans running back to Donald Trump versus like after with January 6th or what have you, versus like Democrats running back to Cuomo. It seems like it's kind of a bipartisan thing.
Yeah, I mean, I also think there's a ton of disgust in the Democratic Party right now. And I think Zoran is someone who can very uniquely kind of harness that in this
Yeah.
election because Andrew Cuomo, I mean, his support under 45 is like almost non-existent, right?
Yeah.
For the party that wants to talk about engaging young people, young men, young women, young people of color, he is certainly probably not the candidate for that. And he very neatly, I would say, embodies kind of that status quo that many people are just raging against. And this is, and I do, for as great as Noran's campaign has been in terms of actually really like running a mass comms campaign and like getting people engaged. There will also be in other parts of the electorate, more liberal boomer areas, more parts of Manhattan, Brownstone, Brooklyn, who are just entirely organically engaged just because of Trump.
Yeah.
Where this is like there is a big blue wave spike here. And Cuomo, there will be people who undoubtedly identify him as like, oh, New York, he can bully him back. I don't trust the 33-year-old. There also will be a lot of people who energized by Trump and are like, oh, we're doing this, we're bringing this retread back. No, thank you.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, like Donnie, he had not much name recognition when he jumped in. That's obviously changed a ton. A lot of it's been videos, comms, right? He's been everywhere to some degree. I mean, to a lot large degree, he's been everywhere. Didn't come without negatives, obviously, and they're going after the stuff on Israel, ton, right? They're going after maybe his record didn't have a huge record in Albany, and there was an element of like, oh, he's was he a nepo baby, right? Because he came from at least well established professional parents. I don't know their financial situation, but he's been able to sort of push a lot of that aside. I mean, Israel stuff has been a thorn in his side, and well, he owns responsibility for that. But he's done a great job, I think, avoiding a lot of the things that were clear negatives about him.
Yeah, I mean, especially like with respect to public safety, I think he did a really good job pivoting away from that. He sees the zeitgeist of New York did lend itself to an affordability campaign, but he totally seized it.
Yeah,
That was just kind of there, and no one had the tools to really kind of take it and make it about that. He has defined the race in that way. I think that during the week this week he had a couple bumpy few days with respect to the globalized the Intifada, but some of that is stabilized. And I also just think that other than a handful of Manhattan Assembly districts, I don't really think that will be an
yeah,
issue. Now, granted, those Manhattan Assembly districts will probably decide the whole race. So it probably, it is an issue and it isn't. Um, I think that Cuomo was a generationally flawed candidate. I don't know if you, but it's interesting though because for all of his flaws, he is a white guy who kind of is almost coded as like a black guy, right? Like he is a ton. He has more black support than almost every white politician. That's not a Clinton. That's not De
Yeah.
Blasio. That's not John Lindsay. Like it's very rare, right? So Eric Adams had a lot of black support, but he was getting annihilated in Manhattan, where Cuomo can at least like kind of hold his own. So for all of his flaws, he had certain coalitional contours that did make him tricky. And
Yeah.
all the other candidates kind of really failed to get into that. But Mamdani can kind of find that Achilles heel in a way that might be able to slay Goliath. I mean,
When I was working on the Ramos campaign, I tried to stress affordability. We all wanted to do like a housing state of emergency in like November. Like, there was this element of people are afraid, I think, to jump and do those sorts of things. But Donnie, to his credit, like went and did it. Right, he went and grabbed it. He wasn't afraid of like the negative advertisements that were going to come from landlords or from developers. Went and grabbed that sort of stuff, bull by the horns. He is he has but like he put a lot of time in the video, and I think he had a lot of volunteers that made him able to do that kind of stuff. And I think that like in addition to having the right message, he's been able to like have the right amount of time to put stuff out. He's had the grassroots people that were able to go out to, like you mentioned in your last piece, like really organize places that haven't been organized before, right? Like there is an element of like he not only is good on camera, but like put together a real coalition and organizational structure that I think kind of gets under. I mean, why would you know about that unless you're like a real student of the game, right?
right.
But I think that's been DSA has been helpful with that, but he had to harness it.
But it's even DSA has been certainly really helpful and a big driver in a lot of things. But the word movement is like way overused in
Yeah,
politics. But like 50,000 volunteers, that's a movement, right? But that is much larger than the New York City DSA member role, right? That is something entirely somewhat unique to him, right? It's a combination of so many different things. And I think he personally and his core staff, all of whom I know very well,
yeah,
deserve a ton of credit in kind of taking risks and articulating this vision and sticking to it. But having the left support for all the things that the left does wrong, it did really help him, and to where the Jessica Ramos of 2018 was not the Jessica Ramos of 2025. And that certainly, and I mean, Zohran actually has recently become a very good fundraiser even before this race. But then that grassroots energy, those grassroots donors, everything that was clearly behind him. He maxed out almost immediately, whereas someone like Ramos, having alienated different segments of the left over the last few years, just couldn't raise money. She couldn't raise money. She ended up getting into this debt, kind of made a deal with the devil. But it's a very interesting kind of contrast. And I don't mean to speak ill of her by any means.
feel free.
But I think also
Kidding.
personally, the way the two of them kind of are and interact and things like that, I do think some of it, there's a lot that the principle kind of it flows down from the principle. I'll say that. So,
Yeah,
and I think that is the best compliment I can give Zohran Mamdani is that he's ran a very strong campaign. I think that is commensurate with him.
yeah,
And I think that some of the other candidates who really struggled, they might actually not be as great of managers as they might think they are. So
yeah. No, I mean it's interesting. I didn't sign any confidentiality things. I was just volunteering for Ramos because I had worked with her, and that are interesting. Like she did anger a lot of people, and that when she ran, and a few other people declared soon after, there was like members of the assembly who were like you would think be natural allies were just sort of like trolling her. Right, there was a lot of just like not a lot of institutional support there, and it speaks to like I don't know how. I mean, Montana's only been in legislature for so long, and he's certainly like on the left of things, but like clearly has better relationships, and that has helped him to some degree. When it comes to like at least not antagonizing and being able to raise money and get people on his side, even if he's not the biggest name.
for sure, and he has had his fair share of pieces where they're like littered with anonymous quotes from colleagues, saying he's this, he's that, including Ramos, who went on the record about it. But Duran does have people who will like ride or die with him in a
Yeah,
way that I think that is very helpful, to a candidate. Oh, Jane
Yeah.
Fonda enthusiast said the numbers just dropped. We can wait on that for now,
No, you
but
can take a look at them. It's
let's see.
let's take a look. Let's take a look at the numbers. It is what to call it? Yeah, 9 vote deficit. So yeah, so it's interesting. Like I find, and I'll let you look at the numbers. Like I find it uh interesting to see he's gone this far. And I think about what does it mean for the left, right? Because so many people are so mad at the centrist Democrats, right? And you've seen um, like the way Democrats nationally, someone mentioned Bill Clinton earlier on, asking what kind of difference that'll make, James Clyburn, all these people coming out. And it kind of shows, I think, if nothing else, where where, not to say the problem, but like where you know, the fight within the Democratic Party, they talk about wanting to get younger, they want to get more diverse, they want to get a different message. It's a lot of people still hanging on to power, right? It's a
Yeah,
lot of people still trying to hang on, no matter what that means for electorate or what it means for generations, to come.
just to give a quick update, total
Yeah.
early votes almost 385,000.
Wow.
Someone in the comments also said that Brooklyn is 37.1% of the electorate, which, for context, in early voting 4 years ago, they were like 28% of the electorate. And then that went up to 34 on election day. So Brooklyn could easily hit 40% of the electorate on Tuesday.
What's interesting that is, so I'm originally like I'm not originally I've lived here like almost 20 years now. After college moved here, so whatever. But I grew up in Jersey, like right outside, and so like I have always had family here. Like I knew it was going to be in New York City, but to some degree, when I moved here, I moved into. I didn't live in Williamsburg, but I was sort of like, I guess you could say it's a gentrifier because I didn't have any money. But I lived near where my family was, but it's an element, like there's an element of like that gentrification, that those hipsters, those people from like the early mid 2000s have like grown up now and like now have like kids of their own and they're like part of the firmament in the city. And and they seem to also be pro Zoran. So there's a lot of like also now like another generation of young people, like people I work with who are like 25 or whatever. That's like a second generation of like gentrifiers that are now, on the left. I think that makes a big difference, right? Like there's a element of like maybe people have become more conservative over time. The coalition has grown just because of the sheer number of people moving to the city and changing politically.
Yeah, I mean, certainly like the childcare crisis is very real, and ironically I was like making fun of elder millennials and Gen X for their sagging voting numbers, but some of my Gen X elder millennial friends were like, because we all have to leave,
Mm.
and
It's true.
I think anyone who has been in the city the last 10 years, the cost of living crisis is very, very real. And I think this lane was there for the taking, and Zoran really, really took it. And I mean, I think you're right. Like there have been the young professional class has been really steadily moving into Brooklyn, these other neighborhoods since like the early 2000s, and
Mm.
they've been politicized, really. Obama, Trump, Bernie, AOC, like these are not 1968 hippies,
Right.
They're like, they watch the news, they care, they're invested. And recently they've been given, like in the last basically 7 years, they've been given reasons to invest um like in local politics,
Right.
right? And I think we're potentially, and that cohort has the power to potentially tidal wave the establishment. And we'll see if this is the right candidate at the right time with the right coalition to do that.
Well, what's interesting to me is that, like, so again, I can reference being with Ramos is that the idea that she's a labor, right? It's like the head of the labor committee in the Senate. She was a big, just hoping unions would sign on with her. And it didn't happen because a lot of them waited for Cuomo. And, a lot of working class neighborhoods are going to wind up being Cuomo to some degree. But we have a guy who's like a democratic socialist. And, we can see this like nationwide, right? A lot of labor ends up going with more centrist or establishment candidates and, centrist type politicians where like there's this new left of young people that are very like ideologically and grisly financially, pro labor and need to be. And I'm curious, like, does this like look like a sea change given the age of the given the age of the Cuomo electorate, right? Like, is it an element of like, will this will the New York working class vote, maybe not like the white ethnic one, but really start changing and moving to the left once Cuomo generation starts moving away and seeing what someone like Zoran can do.
I think so. And I think also, like, if you did have a Mayor Mamdani situation, right, for his reelection, most of the labor unions would probably, the ones who did not support him, many of them
Yeah.
probably would, right? And he would just organically, from being a better known, well funded, more just having developed some degree of a relationship to a broader segment of the electorate, do better in probably many of the places that he might not do so well this time, right?
Hmm.
So, some of it is just time, right? I do think time is on his side, but you can never say something like that because conditions change so much, you
Yeah.
know? And that's why I do say, like, it is now or never, I think not for him personally, but for this type of, for someone like him to become the mayor, right? Because there's going to be that charter commission that might pass that will then include jungle primaries.
Right.
There will be better center left candidates that are supported by, kind of the institutional
Hmm.
class, right? That center left, like Jessica Tisch is the name that has always gotten thrown out, but I think
That's
that's very
wild.
real. No, I mean, well, she's not terribly charismatic, but it's like billionaire police commissioner. That is,
It's like
you run it up
Bloomberg
on Staten
Jr.
Island. It's basically, yeah, it is Bloomberg Jr. And frankly, there is still an appetite for that, right? We have the ideological left, as
Yeah.
I once put it, that kind of the the non-ideological center left middle, right? That Bloomberg, that Tisch, that Garcia, and then kind of the atrophying machines and establishment that is right now still the dominant force, but
Right.
increasingly decaying.
Yeah, I think that's the interesting thing to me. The decay of that is what replaces that, right? There's groups like DSA, and they're not going to be never going to be like dominant. But there was Working Families Party once upon a time. They sort of fallen apart. So there's those groups, and then there's the organizing labor, which I don't know if they're dying, but I think like the machine, and
The
I'm
the turnout, the
yeah,
turnout apparatus
yeah,
is not
exactly,
what it once was. You're not farming votes in working class neighborhoods the way you used to. I mean, look at that. Look at the Bronx turnout for early voting
yeah.
as proof, as proof of that. There's a lot of labor density in the Bronx.
Yeah, and one of the, I mean, you mentioned it earlier, is that some of the Bronx, some of the South Brooklyn, a lot of places started moving to the right a little bit
Yeah.
in 2024, and part of that was, maybe it was Trump's being a New York guy and having this weird appeal that Americans can't seem to get rid of, can't get enough of. Obviously, Biden was weak, and Kamala didn't exactly like speak to working class audiences, but the I don't know if how permanent that is, but it does make a difference in this election because fewer voters possibly, and more discussed, I guess, with like the Democratic machine.
Right. And I think, ironically, a lot of candidates made like a poor bet with this mayoral election because they're like, oh, Trump like did really well in New York City, got to pivot to the middle, pivot right. And it's like, well, actually, no, the Democratic electorate, the primary electorate, is becoming increasingly skewed towards that white, left leaning college graduate. And the working class are actually leaving the Democratic electorate. So it makes the primary electorate more progressive. It's just the general electorate in a high turnout environment that year was not hospitable to Democrats.
Right.
It's not like Trump was winning Democratic primary working class voters. He's winning non prime, Black, Hispanic, primarily men who are either independents or like nominal Democrats,
Right.
and so that was, there never really, I didn't never believe that there was like a danger that the Democratic primary electorate would get quote unquote more conservative. These
Right.
neighborhoods, people want good schools. They want to be safe, right? They don't want defunded police, and they want to feel like they know the people that are campaigning and that are
Yeah.
running that they can support, and that it's all an important, but a non-majority of the electorate is ideological, as AOC said. She might have copied me, but no, I'm kidding. But it's all about relationships, and in the absence of a real relationship, you kind of have the institutions, the local
Yeah.
institutions do it for you. But those institutions are dying.
Well, it begs the question of, are those people permanently gone, from the Democratic coalition, or is there
No,
candidates that can bring them back? And I don't know if Mamdani's a candidate who can bring it back, obviously, given what his
I will say the
his
the
profile is, but
the best thing that Zohran has done in a long list of good things is that he is like starting to like resurrect civic life. Civic life used to really enamorate around politics. It used to
Mhm.
really matter. Like that was a thing. And he is helping to like bring that back in conjunction with other organizations and coalitions, but he has been the spark for that. Like those volunteers, like that's not just an email list. That is like a community of people, you
Yeah,
know? Just as AOC was a canvasser for Bernie Sanders in the Bronx, there will be some other great leader amongst them that emerges, right? The first socialist mayor might not be Zohran Mamdani, but it might be someone who canvassed for him. You
that's a
know,
good point.
the next AOC, the next Bernie Sanders, you know, and that, you know, Zohran always says no moral victories, but like there are very real victories to be had. And sometimes I once had this conversation with someone I admire very greatly. Sometimes like the best legacy is, you know, your impression on your ability to inspire people to like do good things in their own life, you know, and to go on to do stuff. And I think for whatever comes on Tuesday, I think there will be this is not just like a flash in the pan. He's not going anywhere. And some of many of those canvassers or people who felt inspired by him will go on to do great things.
I mean, you
And
look
I
at
think
Bernie
that's not
Sanders, right,
nothing.
on the presidential
You know,
level. You know, he's never going to be president. So he doesn't run '86, but you know, he inspired generations of young people, and maybe AOC to be president one day, or someone who ran because of Bernie Sanders, and that you know he becomes like the figurehead, right? Whereas like, I don't know, Mamdani will have the same impact, but like you said, like there's an element of bringing that to the mainstream that wasn't there before. And in terms of civic life, it is interesting. It seems like politics was just very machine heavy in New York and hard to get into and engage with, especially if you're not like especially if you're in like a very heavily Democratic neighborhood. And it seems like you know, and a part of that is just I think civic life generally has shut down. I think to some degree since COVID, right? People don't go out as much. They work from home. They moved out of the city, but there is an element of like this is the first kind of movement we've seen in a long time in New York City.
yeah, and
In terms, yeah,
I think that movement is here to stay. And but you can't underrate something like that, like having a almost like a chain reaction, right? I accompanied Zoran on his walk from Inwood to Battery Park, right? This
it's a
guy
big
probably
walk.
took, oh, it's a great walk. You know, lifelong Manhattanite, never done it. So I was like, this is great. I get to do it. And, you know, I was destroyed after, but it's fine. But he probably took 250 selfies on that walk alone, like, let alone, you know, the handshaking, things like that. But I'm like, there's 250 people, you know, they put it on Instagram, right? They put it everywhere because
Yeah,
if you take a selfie with him, it's a big deal. Like, you want
yeah,
to show that off.
sure.
And I'm just, how many people see those 250 things, right? Average person's got like 500,000 Instagram followers. That adds up really quickly, you know?
It,
And it's organic momentum like that could become a wave, you know?
yeah. That walk, I did it when I was in my 20s, and we walked
I
from the
mean, I'm
top
in
of
my 20s, so
yeah,
it worked
so
out.
yeah, yeah. Like I did it when I was in my 20s. I did it from like we went from the very top to the bottom. It was like, I mean, it was really hot. We did it during the day. It was like July. It was one of the best and dumbest things I've done because I was like wrecked the next day. And he just gets up at 8 a.m. and goes and does his you know press conferences and voter meets.
Remarkable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Tell me about that walk. Beyond the physical
Sure.
gruelingness of it, like what was that energy like? How are people out
You
there?
know, it was certainly for someone who tries to very much check their priors and not be put in the Zoran Mamdani bubble. It was
Yeah.
probably not good for that, right? You see this guy getting swarmed on the street all the time, and you know I'll write about maybe some of this tomorrow, but people here in Manhattan, and probably rightfully so, they think that you know, it's a very affluent
Yeah.
borough, right? And it certainly is, right?
Some parts. Yeah.
Certainly many neighborhoods are, but that first 100 blocks, right? Very working class, borderline. Some of the parts of Inwood and Washington Heights are relatively lower income, right?
Yeah.
And this guy's getting stopped every block. Unlike I crunch the numbers, you know me, I'm a numbers guy. Unlike census blocks that I know that 75% of people speak Spanish, and he's being
Yeah.
stopped on every single block. It was
Wow.
very, you know, I'm maybe this is the Upper East Side native in me, but it was very John Lindsay, right? John Lindsay used to walk
Yeah.
go on very, very long walks. He used to be stopped, and that was kind of his thing. Zoran actually has a lot more charisma than Lindsay did, which is kind of funny, but it was very much reminiscent of that. And it was really fascinating to see him out there in neighborhoods where there really isn't much left presence, right? Walking by
Yeah.
all these apartments that are rent stabilized, it's the little Dominican Republic, and to see that type of organic reaction on the street. It was fascinating. I mean, the guy has incredible energy, and I was better off for seeing that. That's what I'll say.
John Lentil and the Mets jersey, mayor at the
Yeah,
time for Grace, long
Fun
before I was
City.
born. Yeah, greatest. Well, it is interesting. Like, is John Lindsay, like, I guess he'd probably be a Democrat today, but
Yes, he
young
switched to
energy at
being
the
a
time,
Democrat
right?
by
Yeah,
the end of
like,
his second term. Yeah.
yeah. So like, but it is an element of like young, young energy, right? Like there was
Yes.
yeah, I mean, his legacy probably wasn't what he wanted it to be, but like in terms of like, came in troubled times, that's for sure. But the youth element there, like that was an advantage, right?
Lindsay also he had thousands of volunteers. They had 250 storefronts
Yeah.
across all the boroughs. He had that organic enthusiasm that also David Dinkins had, right?
Hmm.
And that has really kind of been lacking in terms of a grassroots campaign for the last 36 years. I'm because Dinkins '89 was a movement too, different movement than today. But Lindsay, Dinkins, Mamdani, that's a pretty interesting. We're threading kind of that
Yeah.
progressive grassroots from past to present. Um, but it was very cool. Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you before we go is like the amount
Go
of
for it.
money that has gone to Cuomo's super
Yeah.
PAC. It's like, I did a story on that for More Perfect Union where I work, and just this year, it's almost outdated already. The amount of like real estate money that went into. We had to actually have someone, our host had to like film a thing at home, being like, "Hey, so after we shot this, the landlords gave 2.5 million. The landlord gave $2.5 million. Like, how much people been paying attention however long. Sometimes people pay attention for months. Sometimes they tune in the last week. Like, how much do you think that makes a difference, or is it a matter
If
of
he
like people
if
deciding?
he loses by like one, two, or three, like it was the money.
Yeah,
And I'm someone who I kind of like went out on a not a limb, but like when Bowman lost, I was like, guys, like the money had almost nothing to do with it. He was
yeah,
like in a hole way before they spent any money. And so I'm not afraid, or I try not to be afraid to say like the uncomfortable thing to
yeah,
like progressive audiences, but he loses by like two. I mean, you could really credibly blame the money. You could also blame
yeah.
a million other things, but it's definitely having an effect. And I think the mediums that they are blanketing, broadcast television,
Right.
mailboxes, those are the mediums frequented by older voters, the ones who do not know Mamdani. And if he loses, it's just because he got annihilated with older out of borough Democrats.
Yeah.
But super PAC ads, they can't. You seen a Mamdani attack ad, you're not like, yes, I'm fired up. I'm going to the polls. Generally
Right.
not. Generally
Right.
not. And I think Cuomo's biggest concern is turnout. I also think I'm really curious to watch some of these black neighborhoods in Brooklyn, Queens, the Bronx. By the time we get to the final round, Eric Adams was some of these places like 80-20, 90-10, right? Ridiculous
And he only
margins.
won by one
I think
point in the end.
exactly. I think if Zohran keeps it like 75-25, 70-30, that's like,
Yeah.
it's very doable. I've got my spreadsheet. That's very doable. Anything better, I think then he's really operating. And also what I'm interested in is that for as much success as he's had with under 45s, white, Hispanic, Asian, if he can have real success with under 45s in the black electorate, even though it's a much smaller
Right.
amount, that could just raise the floor. So then it's like, oh, wow, we kind of cut Cuomo's legs out from under him.
Yeah.
So
Right.
we'll
Last
see.
question from me. Last question from
Go
me, and
for
then
it.
we'll open it up real quick for the audience. If I know people that ask some questions. So last question from me. The bromance, I guess you can call it, between Lander and Zoran. Obviously, Michael Blake joined them. Adrian Adams pointedly did not join that after
Yeah.
being put in the race, kept in the race by the money bomb. So it's that can be, she can either like regret that or say she was saved by this choice. We'll see what happens on Tuesday. But how much do you think those things matter? Like the Lander thing. I mean, that's it. To me, like, as he's a Jewish guy, right? And I think that to some degree is a huge inoculation point against a lot of the stuff they've been saying about Zoran. But what do you think? How much do you think that matters? That
I think like
across both of them?
on his face, I would say like, oh, it probably doesn't matter a ton. Landers voters already extremely high information, very
Yeah.
ideological. Lander himself has put a lot of time into not only defending Zoran, but like rigorously campaigning with him. Like his
Mhm.
voters know Mamdani is his number two. I think that is worth a lot. Like he did
Right.
not, this was not a tepid number two. He really like, hey, obviously, and he like went in with him. And even after, he kind of had his back with respect to some of, the fallout from that globalized the Intifada comment. And he's really done it enthusiastically, and I think that matters.
Yeah.
It ultimately the cross endorsement, it really is like what you put into it. Andrew Yang put a lot into his Catherine Garcia
Mm.
endorsement, like huge rally in Flushing. He would not really shut up about her
Yeah.
for like a whole month, and I think Lander he did it in a he's done it very earnestly. I think that can't be discounted.
Yeah, he's not his most not his most famous backer. Obviously, AOC popping in. I don't know if it's last minute, but makes a difference. But I do think there's an element of like, hey, this guy's okay for people who are like maybe like
Yeah.
middle aged, like Park Slope types who are like, I don't know, is it a bad thing? Does he hate me? But having someone like that be like, no, I can vouch for this guy. I think it makes at least psychologically some difference.
And I also think that Lander is in line for, he's been kind of the single digits since like February. I think
Yeah,
he's in line for a bump. I have him firmly finishing in the double digits on election night by a couple points,
yeah,
and I think that can only be good for Mamdani. So
yeah,
I think also,
definitely.
as someone, I like Brad Lander. I think he's a very nice and kind person. I'm while he's not going to win, I'm glad that he has kind of found his mojo the last couple
Yeah,
weeks.
he's got that mensch thing going on. All right, so I want to open up real quick if anybody has any questions. I know some people asked them while we were doing this. We talked about whether something like Bill Clinton matters. We can answer that one. But as
I will
people,
answer that and
yeah,
just say no. That means absolutely nothing.
yeah. No, what about Jim Clyburn? Anyone care about that?
Also, absolutely nothing. I mean, like,
Yeah,
if Cuomo is so screwed that he needs like Jim Clyburn to rile people up, then it's over for him.
yeah,
These endorsements, almost none of them matter,
yeah.
but people like to have fun on social media.
They become like a thing that you can report on too. Not you personally, but
Yeah.
yeah,
I
yeah,
was big on the AOC endorsement. I mean, they cut that AOC television ad because, I mean, she is popular,
yeah,
and I think, frankly, oh boy, someone's going to clip this, but the Bernie Sanders not doing the oligarchy rally. This is literally like the oligarchy is buying the race.
yeah.
I think that was, I don't know what their schedule was, but like not
I'm in
elite
Texas right now.
planning. No, I know, but like I don't
Yeah.
know if they pre-scheduled that, but like that
Uh,
was not like, I don't know, man, not great.
yeah,
I don't know how
yeah,
you spend that. I think that was a big missed opportunity. Not
yeah. That would've been
that, but
cool.
that's on Bernie though. Like, so
Right. Yeah.
who knows?
Someone just asked about the weather. We talked about
I
this,
think the
but if you
weather
want
will.
to, yeah,
I think the weather will really will significantly hinder voter turnout in the Bronx that is already very low, and I
yeah,
think it will also um, hurt other neighborhoods where people do not have cars, where there is very little infrastructure to keep street temperatures down. East Flatbush is kind of one that comes to mind that is not in the Bronx. But I mean, the Bronx, it's like basically west of the Bronx River. It's like every neighborhood
yeah.
fits this description. Um, what do you call it? Sorry, I got an incoming call that I have to respectfully decline.
But I
Yeah,
want to say
hang
like
on.
it's funny that Cuomo is now like, oh, put air conditioners in voting spots, and let's get shade for people. Like maybe now finally a New York politician will pay attention to all these places with no trees and no air conditioning because they realize it's actually hurting them.
Me? No. Oh, that was so fun. Sorry, I got a funny message. Okay. I'm all set. Sorry, but when you get an incoming call, like the audio just
Oh
tweak.
yeah, screw it up. No,
Sorry to
I was
your
just saying.
listeners.
No, I was saying it's funny to think that Chrome is now calling for air conditioning, right? In places they're like, oh, we should have tree covers and shade. All these places that are ignored by politicians and have for so long become like heat, become like sweltering in the summer. Like all these places that they don't care about, all of a sudden they need the votes from. So they go, it's give them shade.
I think it was too late to write the story, but ironically, like Cuomo, he did sign the bill moving the primary from
Yep.
August, from he had to move it from September. It had to be before August to comply with federal law, right? But the sorry, I lost my train of thought. But it could have been any time. It didn't have to be June. Um, and so but they chose June, right? But in that switch, there was no appropriation for air conditioning at any of
Interesting.
the polling sites, anything like that. So if you're an ambitious journalist, if you work for Politico at the Daily News and you're listening to this, probably not too late to do that story, you know? Um,
Yeah.
but that is kind of interesting though, because they did move it to June. This was a possibility, certainly. And you want people to vote safe, but now it's kind of like, hey, you like install 750 air conditioners. And honestly, some of these gyms are really large. You would need more than one.
Yeah.
And these are like industrial ACs. But what do you call it? That's like not gonna happen by Tuesday. So
I thought it was
I
funny that if you have $25 million, maybe you can, a super PAC. Maybe you can start giving
Yeah,
some
I
AC
did make a
places.
comment, and then people are like, "You want old people to be killed?" I'm like, "No, that's not true." I want to make it very clear. I'm just trying to accurately assess how
Yeah.
extreme weather will affect voter behavior. I want everyone to vote very
Sure.
safely. You
Yeah.
know, um,
And
just
that's
just gotta put that out there.
Yeah, that's good. And we got another question here, like a general election. So Cuomo, if he doesn't win, he could be independent line. He's got his own ballot line. If
You know,
whatever it's called, whatever. But then Adams said he's going to run independent. Zoran could be Working Families Party, like, or if he wins Democratic. So what do you imagine like a three-headed dragon race?
I had I'm gonna say back and forth. I had a rebuttal to something Harry Siegel said, who I very much respect. He's a very smart guy. But I actually think people are putting too much stock into this hypothetical general election. If Cuomo wins the Democratic primary, he is, barring another devastating scandal that is
Yeah.
newly unearthed, he will win the general election.
Mm.
If Sharon wins the primary, then like the odds go down, but I think he's still favored. It would be a really crowded middle anti-Zoran lane. Crucially, Adams, Sliwa, and Cuomo don't have any impetus to what do you call it? Like bend the knee to one another and get
Yeah.
out, right? I think Sliwa though is like pretty much a nothing burger, and I think Adams is mortally wounded politically.
Yeah.
That guy's
I got
approval ratings are terrible.
I gotta say, I will say for Sliwa, his ability to stay relevant 40 years later and then still wear the same outfit and make it like still look be somewhat fashionable, I think is a credit to him. Politically, I obviously am not on his side, but he does have a certain something about him.
Yeah, well, I think to be a conservative leaning candidate in New York City, you need to either be able to break into Manhattan, right?
Yeah,
Like white collar Manhattan, or you need to have like two quasi liberals and just annihilate them in the outer boroughs,
yeah,
like a William F. Buck, or no, sorry, like not William F. Buckley, his brother, James Buckley, like a
yeah.
James Buckley style, Nixon Reagan era backlash. You would need something like that. And there's just no candidate. I think a crowded general would be very interesting. I would love it from just an academic standpoint. It's 4 more months of this, and I love
Yeah,
this.
a lot to
But
write about.
I think everyone is very interesting except for Curtis Lee. No offense, Curtis Lee, if you're listening, I'm sorry, but I don't think I think it would be a lot more interesting if there was like a like red like a red baiting like pro Trump person of
Interesting,
color as the Republican, and is like, I
interesting.
am trying to be a Republican and win Corona again in a normal year.
And the
Like a
guy who just got
real
to
like
jail
law and
recently,
order.
that could be that one day.
Oh boy. Okay, no one who went to jail, but like a more sane Ruben Diaz Sr.
Okay, yeah. I
That
mean,
would be
it's.
interesting.
I'm trying to think like who are the New York Republicans like that would be at all viable?
The bench is so cooked. Ironically, like New York Democrats have like most of them have no clue about like the state of life in many, many neighborhoods beyond their
Yeah,
own. The New York Republicans are even more clueless. Like they win
yeah,
just like by accident. The New York Republicans, like the leadership, it's just like kind of edge lords who like go to like these um gatherings in like Whitestone and are
yeah.
like, oh yeah, like we go out in Manhattan, bro, like JD Vance, like it's sick. Like they have no clue about realignment and Corona, they're just like backing into it,
Like little
It's like
Nazis on the Upper East
it's
Side
like
too. And
Vicky
I live on the Upper East
Palladino's
Side, but
kid.
yeah,
It's like
yeah.
Vicky Palladino's kid. God, he's gonna see this and get pissed. But like,
Vicky
send a mean
Palladino.
tweet my way.
I hope she watches this. Vicky Palladino. It's
Yeah.
very nasty person. But I was thinking George Santos could be the guy who delivers for Republicans. Attleboro, man of color, who is a MAGA
Like
guy. It's all set up for him.
That maybe 2022 George Santos.
How about we'll have a Santos versus Cuomo election. Cuomo will be like
Eventually,
75.
I would have loved a Mamdani Democrat, Cuomo Independent, Eric Adams Trump Republican. Because
Ooh,
I think the Eric Adams, besides his Orthodox coalition, I think he's like terribly suited to win over nominal Republican voters.
that would be
I think they would go for Cuomo over him.
that is his
Like
comeback.
having to watch breezy like Irish and Italian people in like Breezy Point and Staten Island vote for Eric Adams, the Republican. I would love that. I
Maybe
would
that's his
love to
comeback.
see that. Yeah.
Well, listen. How can people find you and find your podcast, your
So
newsletter, and all
you
the
can basically
yeah,
just just go into or either click my little thing here, which should redirect to my page, or you can just go to Google, type in Michael Lang, Lange, space NYC, my Twitter, my Substack, everything will be there.
yeah? Narrative
Um,
Wars is the great read. You should go subscribe now because
yes,
a
get on
lot of
that
stuff
free
in the coming
list
days.
for the predictions piece tomorrow morning. Hopefully by 9 a.m. We'll see how much sleep I get. By 9 a.m. I should do full predictions. Every assembly district, every round, ranked choice voting runoff. I don't think I'll have time to make a precinct map, but that's okay.
You had I
Really
saw your
excited.
tweet. You had Mark Levine big time over Justin Brennan.
I just think it's really hard to lose when you're just annihilating your opponent in Manhattan.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think Mark Levine loses less than 10 precincts north of 59th Street. I just think that's really hard. And I mean, Brandon, they've made a huge play for like these Zohran coattails, but like, I know tons of Zohran Levine voters, I meet them all the
Interesting.
time. And also for the coattails to work, Zohran would have to win like 57-43. Like it would
Yeah,
just actually have to be like, oh my God, he landslided Cuomo. What happened? Yeah, so Brandon wins Brooklyn, Levine wins Manhattan, Levine wins the Bronx, Staten Island. I would actually love to see from an academic
yeah,
perspective. You have like a guy who speaks Yiddish and Spanish versus like the Bay Ridge councilman. That would be interesting. I would probably lean Brandon, but we'll see. They
yeah,
might be turned off that he's a WFP guy. And then Queens, I have no idea.
yeah. He's
Yep.
an
See,
interesting
like
guy, Brennan.
someone in the chat said Zoran Levine voters. See, like there are tons of them. Manhattan is filled with them.
Yeah.
Um, and I think because I think frankly you put the resume side by side, it's not like they're terribly different.
No. I mean, it's interesting. I think Brennan is also an interesting guy. He's got very unconventional background for a politician, and
Yeah,
he's
no,
got
he's
yeah.
very interesting. I mean,
I'm neutral on it, but it's interesting. He's an
I led my
I think
Substack. I like them both. They are both
yeah,
readers. I have to be charitable, but I don't think they would read if I was giving predictions that I didn't believe in, right? So,
yeah.
Justin,
I
I'm sorry that I don't think you're going to win, but it's hard to run it. It's hard to get like tons of attention when you're a comptroller candidate.
yeah,
It's just hard.
absolutely.
It's hard to break through running against a borough-wide elected in like the second most vote dense borough. That's tough.
Yeah.
It's just tough. That's all.
No, I think it'll be interesting. We'll see. We'll see on Tuesday. So, you just going to now spend the next, I guess, the next bunch of hours watching basketball and praying on your choices.
I'm not going to pray myself to finish. I mean, like the choice is made. The choice
Yeah.
is made. It's just writing all of it, getting my graphics in order. We'll see how much sleep I get. I think also the Thunder will win tonight, but if the Pacers win, what would be a bigger upset? Pacers beating the Thunder, or Zoran beating Cuomo? I would go with Zoran beating Cuomo, although the Pacers were like a huge underdog to start the series.
I gotta
Oh,
say,
someone said, "Do you have a winning pick for Game 7?" I mean, it would be really hard to bet against the Thunder,
yeah,
but I'm kind of rooting for chaos. I don't know.
I can't root for the Pacers. I mean, maybe I'm just from the '90s, and so I just can't get past
Yeah,
the past that.
I would actually feel really bad for Sam Presti, who built an
Yeah.
excellent team.
Well,
If he went another year without getting it,
yeah. Yeah, we'll see who wins tonight, and then we'll see who wins Tuesday. Everybody, subscribe to the Narrative Wars and get ready for that big drop tomorrow morning. You
big
can
drop
just
tomorrow.
ignore
I've
work.
waited 4 years for this. I got into
This
the
is like
game
your Super Bowl.
after. This is my Super Bowl.
Yeah, this is your Game 7. At least
This
until
was
the
a
next one.
pleasure. Yeah.
Absolutely, Michael. Thank you for being here, Michael Lang from the Narrative Wars. And if you're in New York City and haven't voted yet, go out Tuesday.
Thank you very much.
All right, take
Pleasure's
care,
all
man.
mine.
Thank
Take
you,
care.
everyone.